Welcome back to another episode of Self-Directed Podcast, the podcast where we break down how to build a life and career on your own terms, taking deliberate action to put that in place. Today's guest, very, very special guest, somebody that I'm so excited about the conversation that we just recorded, somebody who's obviously very kindred spirit with the ideas, philosophies that we talk about at Praxis, and has lived out that model, the model that we talk about in Self-Directed, about building his own career, taking his life and career into his own hands with deliberate plan of action. College dropout to the CEO and founder of a very successful business doing over $20 million in revenue per year. Chandler Bolt is an investor advisor to CEO of Self-Publishing School and selfpublishing.com. He's the author of 6 best-selling books, including his most recent book titled Published. Self-Publishing School is an Inc. 5000 company the last 3 years in a row as one of the 5,000 fastest growing private companies in the U.S. Chandler is also the host of the 7-Figure Principles podcast and Self-Publishing School podcast. Through his books, podcasts, YouTube channels, and Self-Publishing School, he's helped thousands of people write a book that grows their income, impact, and business. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. If you or anyone you know has ever gone through that process of approaching a big goal that a lot of other people around you, they thought it was unconventional or contrary, or maybe that was dropping out of school or leaving a stable job to go start your own business or changing career paths, writing a book, whatever it is, if you've had one of those unconventional goals and you've been weighing the decision, or maybe you've already decided to take action toward that goal and you've had some of that chatter, that self-doubt, or you've heard other people, saying, hey, I think you're making a big mistake, and you've wrestled with that situation. Well, this podcast is for you. We have an awesome conversation. We talk about, Chandler, his route into entrepreneurship, from the decision of dropping out of college, what he did next, how he built a successful 7-figure business over the past decade plus. You're going to enjoy this. Feel free to drop comments below. If you're watching on YouTube, if not, if you enjoyed today's episode, please go leave us a review so more people can find this. And thank you again, as always, for listening to Self-Directed. Here's another episode. All right, and welcome back to Self-Directed. I'm so excited today to talk to Chandler Bolt. We'll add in the intro here in a little bit, but Chandler is founder and CEO of Self-Publishing School. He's got so many other different cool things that he's got going on, has done through the years. So we'll link to some of that in the show notes. I'm sure we'll talk about some of it in the show as well. Chandler, thanks for joining us.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we could connect. I mean, we were just talking before we flipped this on about all the different kind of like convergences of like people in your network, my network, some of the ideas and things that you've put out into the world that really resonate. And I want to like rewind time for you. A lot has happened, over the past few years for you, but I want to just kind of hear your story. We work with young adults all over the country who kind of have that entrepreneurial itch. And they're looking out in the world and they're saying, hey, I feel like there's more out there for me. I feel like this traditional path, it's frustrating. It feels like there's got to be more. And It seems like you've been a trailblazer in like leaning into that, create your own path. And so I don't know where it began for you, where that kind of motivation came from, or what the high important parts are that have kind of led you down this path. But I would love to hear it from you. What's your story? Where did it begin? How did this, this kind of like unconventional way of thinking and approaching your life and career, where did it all begin?
Yeah. So I'm a C-level English student, college dropout that has built a self-publishing school. So a school and teaching people to write books. So like kind of one of the most unlikely paths. I would have never projected that as my path. And I think that's the point, right? That's the point of what you guys do. And I've accidentally caused a lot of people to drop out of school. And I think there's a lot of parents that initially hated me. But I mean, for me, I'm an entrepreneur through and through. And I started businesses when I was in high school and then in college and through internships like student painters. That was a big part of my journey through college. They teach you how to run a business by running an exterior house painting company and that sort of thing. So like that really was a jumping off point for me. I think I was very fortunate because I had an entrepreneurship class in high school, which helped me start my first couple of businesses. So just like crazy opportunities that most people don't get, which I think is a huge part of why you guys exist, and is to help people take a different path, right? And so I think for me, again, very fortunate and just having really, really strong parents. And my dad was kind of always like this contrarian of like, why does every degree take 4 years? It's like, they don't. It's just the longest one took 4 years. And so they just filled up all the other ones to take that. Or like, he's like, in Europe, all their degrees are 3 years. And like, just like talking, kind of like chirping in my ear, I think a little bit growing up. And I think that kind of built this, hold up, I'm going to rethink this. And for me, at the end of the day, what it all came down to was I got tired of learning how to run a business from professors who had never ran a business. Yeah. And that didn't make too much sense to me. So I decided to drop out, and I dropped out, started the business. I mean, so just fast forwarding all the way to today, I mean, we went from 0 to over $20 million in the last 5.5 years with self-publishing school. We've been on the Inc. 5000 list as one of the 5,000 fastest growing private companies in America last 3 years in a row. Best places to work, like Inc., like all that stuff. But that's the highlight reel, right? And there's a lot of really rock bottom moments across that journey. And so that's why I'm so passionate about what you guys do, and just a huge believer in I've gotten the chance to work with, we've had Praxis people work with us, or I don't know if ever for us, but close to it in some capacity. It's just like quality people. I want to say kids, but I think that would be offensive because it's like, hell no. Like quality young people doing awesome stuff. And so I know this is a really long, long answer, but I just want to circle back to say, like, I firmly believe in what you guys do and help people with, because I think there's so many people graduating with a psychology degree and $200,000 in debt, or a communications degree and $175,000 in debt. And I think it's the worst thing that you could possibly do, because the truth is, a lot of people don't know what they want to do. Like myself included. In college. So it's like, do an internship, do a working program, an apprenticeship. I think even trade schools, I think, are like, everyone loves to poo-poo on trade schools. It's like, you could be a 6-figure plumber. You could be a 6-figure, but no one wants to. Without debt. Anyways, alternative ed and all those things, avoiding debt from college, like all those things, I think are just a huge part of why I believe in what you guys are doing. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough to get started in the real world, like, let alone if you have a $200,000 parachute, while you're trying to run. So have you, this is a quick question, but a fun one, not to poke fun or whatever, but like, do people still ask you if you're ever going to go back and finish your degree? Not often, maybe every now. Here's my answer to that question. I say, I'm going to go be so successful that I go back and they're going to give me an honorary degree. There you go. That's my plan. I definitely will not go back to finish my degree. Yeah. Did you hear that question a lot more often as you were like first getting started? Yes. And I think this will be helpful for people. Is there's this weird time period when you've made the decision, but it hasn't paid off yet, where you feel very skeptical about the decision, but also you're getting all this external pressure from your parents, from your friends, from all those things. And so if you say, hey, I'm taking a year off, or I'm doing this 1-year work program, or this all ed program, or this apprenticeship or internship, or whatever you want to call it, anytime you deviate from the path, skeptics are going to come out of the woodwork. So for me, when I decided to drop out, there was people I hadn't talked to in years, some that I didn't even know, that were just like friends of the family. They're like, hey, I just want to let you know, I think you're making a bad decision. Oh my gosh. Like, why don't do this? And it was just, you have to be like, oh man, thank you so much for your opinion. I'll definitely take that into consideration. And you hang up the phone and you say, I'm not doing that. And you have to be, you have to be confident in that. But to more directly answer your question, there was this, for me, it was the time between when I dropped out and when I had initial success, where I felt like I had to give a disclaimer. to everyone that I met. It's like, oh, I just dropped out, but I didn't flunk out, and I had like pretty good grades, like a 3.4 or something, but like, and I'm working on this thing, but it's like, I would give this big, long explanation. And the truth is probably not many people cared, nor did my 5-minute preamble to dropping out probably change anyone's opinion about me. But it's like, I think that encapsulates probably the emotion or the feeling of someone who goes off the path, that you feel like you have to justify it when you shouldn't.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And man, I hear that from young adults all the time, especially people who are struggling with the decision. It's like, I'm not having a good time in college or doing whatever I'm doing. Maybe it's a job. And it's like, I want to do something different, but like, everybody around me tells me it's dumb. And that's a tough thing, especially once you jump out and do it. For you, what do you feel like changed? I'm sure that there were some personal perspective, but also some success helps, but like, were there milestones for you in making that transition from like being the person who feels like you had to give a disclaimer, where you had to kind of like almost like the insecurity that comes with dealing with the social pressure, to the person who's like, I don't care. I'm so committed to this. I'm doing great. Like, here's what I'm doing. And like, if you don't like it, tough. Like having the confidence versus kind of that disclaimer.
Yeah. What changed? That's a great question. I think a few things. Number one, and this didn't necessarily change, but it helped, is the confidence that I had from my parents. And I think if you don't have that, it can be very difficult. And I've done some podcast interviews and had conversations with people about their decision to potentially drop out of school. And I think a lot of those folks have went back to their parents and had real tough conversations, and parents who weren't supportive. So I think that was really helpful. But then what changed, you mentioned, we were talking about this before the interview, but the very first book I wrote with my brother, Breaking Out of a Broken System, that talks about one of the chapters is the concept of many, many successes. So MANY, a lot, of MINI, tiny successes. And I think that is, and we talk about that as kind of like one of the success principles of breaking out of a broken system. And I think that's one of the big ones for me, is it was a lot of little things. And it was the first sale. It was the first, for me, it's like, I run a company called Self-Publishing School. We help people write and publish books. They grow their impact, their income, and their business. Right. So for me, actually, the book was one of the, so it's like, oh, I just made $400 while I was snowboarding. That's crazy. And it was like, okay, my book's making a few $1,000s a month, paying the bills while I drop out of school. So that was an early, and it's like, okay, I did something that was successful. Now that helped me get on a podcast and do a podcast interview, and that brought some business opportunities. It sold some books. Okay. And then I got on another podcast. Okay. Now I got this Business Insider article. So it's almost like, it's just so dumb, but it's like this external validation of like, oh, Chandler did this thing. Now he's legit. And it's a total vanity metrics, but in some cases it actually helps the bottom line and revenue that you're generating from your business. But it does help boost your confidence in that. So I think those things, and just having a lot of really great people pour into me and on a consistent basis, and mentors, and I was paid to go through like online education programs and stuff like that. And so like those were super critical, to just have people who were speaking into my life along the path, because I think when I dropped out, I had like 4 months of runway. So 4 months of savings. So it's like, all right,
that's going all in.
we gotta start generating some revenue. But there's some amazing lessons that are learned from that, right? Which is, until you have sales, you don't have a business, you have a business idea, right? And that becomes ever present when you have no money in the bank account, because you're like, this is not a business. This is a hobby currently. And as soon as I generate revenue, it'll start to become a business, and I have to generate revenue to pay rent 2 months from now. Then you start, that has a way of just pulling all the noise out, and you focus on exactly what matters to grow the business. So I think those were a lot of the things.
Yeah. I love that point, both as like a metaphor for entrepreneurship, but also like personal development, where you reach that point of realization where it's like, it is all on me. If I don't show up, like, I'm not going to eat. Like, I'm going to be eating ramen noodles for a long time. Like, I'm not going to pay the bills. The lights aren't going to be on. And I think that that's something that school and traditional career paths, it oftentimes just insulates people for a really long time before they get to that point where it's like, it is on me. And like, once you have that, if you can go apply that to your career and like step out as an entrepreneur, like embrace that, like that can become a superpower if you're willing to go bet on yourself. I had a thought as you were talking about the mini wins, and it kind of thought is like this transition from like running aimlessly to like running bases, where you're going from a deliberate point to a deliberate point to deliberate point. And back to kind of the earlier question or earlier situation, like whether it's somebody dropping out of college or somebody thinking about a career change or even like writing a book, they have a big goal or something that's in front of them, uneasiness with where they're at. I feel like a big thing is the fear of failure. And like without having a plan, it can be really difficult to go make that leap. You've done a lot of things. I'm sure that, it sounds like you've had a lot of successes, but I'm sure you've failed a lot too. How do you cope with failure now? How do you deal with, what advice for that young person out there that's like, I want to go do this thing, I'm scared of failing. What's your advice to that young person?
Don't be scared of it, because if you're worried about it happening, if you're worried about the possibility of it happening, just pull out that worry, because it's not a possibility. It's an inevitability. It's going to happen. So good news. There's no uncertainty now. It's certain there is going to be failure.
Yeah.
And I seek it out, and we seek it out as a company. It's one of our 5 core values is fail fast, fail forward, fail often. And so our goal is to fail as fast as possible. That's the goal. Because we believe that with failure comes learning. So anytime we try anything new, it's like a couple of years ago, I started doing speaking, and I hadn't really done much before then. But I said, all right, we're going to make speaking like a big thing. And we want this to generate $1 million in revenue in 2018. Yep. And our goal was to fail as fast as possible. So whereas most people would be way more strategic and like, we're only going to say yes to certain speaking opportunities, or maybe we're not going to pay to go onto a stage and like sponsor an event or stuff like that. Our philosophy was I want to get on as many stages as fast as possible. And I want to just outwork everyone else. Yeah. And we're going to fail a ton, but our feedback loops, like failure is a feedback loop. And so the faster that you can fail, and we talk about this with authors too, is like ship something and get feedback, whether it's your title, your cover, it might be the launch of the book, get feedback, good news, you can update it and republish it. So ship and get feedback. And so for us, that's what we did. And we started getting on all these stages and we learned faster than anyone else. And so the result was, I think on like the final hour of December 31st that year, we passed $1 million in revenue from stages. And it's because, we did, I think it was like 24 speaking events or something that year. And a lot of them were duds, but a good amount were winners. And so now we have a playbook and a process. But if we would have not, just went with the expectation to fail and also to fail as quickly as possible, it would have been demoralizing. And I think that was a lesson, without going into a long story, like that was a lesson I learned as painters, is like in the middle of the summer, half my team quit because it was raining and they couldn't get hours, and you can't paint in the rain outside. And that was this huge setback. And then I hired a new crew, and then I went on to win like #1 in the country, #1 for for that internship. But there was a moment where it didn't look like it could happen. And then I remember at the very end of that, when I got the award for Entrepreneur of the Year, you had to give a speech and all that stuff. And I think in the speech, I talked about that. Because when I reflected back, that was the best part of the summer. And that was this epiphany for me. I was like, oh, all of my biggest learnings and successes came right after that failure. And imagine if I would have given up. And so I started thinking, hey, where are other areas in my life where maybe it's a final roadblock, and either maybe I have given up and I missed out on something, or so now when I go back to those huge roadblocks and big downtimes, I always say to myself, I'm like, oh man, this is good. This means something good's about to come. This is I'm going to learn way more in this time than I would any other time. And then B, like this must be like a final hurdle or roadblock. So it's about to get good. And that was, to use an example within an example, earlier this year is we had a really rough Q1 and it wasn't because of anything, but we just executed poorly. And then COVID happened. And so here I am at the tail end of Q1. I'm like, man, I feel like we're doing all the right things. Like it's about to happen. And I'm thinking something big's about to happen. And I didn't know that it was going to be COVID. But what ended up happening is like, we've had a record breaking year. We've broken records. We just broke a record last month. I think the month before that, the quarter before that, like we'll be all records, but once again, it's like relearning that lesson is the biggest things come right after the biggest failures. Yeah.
That's a really good story. And like reconditioning yourself, versus like traditional school. It's like failure is scary. That's bad. Failure is bad. You can almost get conditioned to like want to avoid that at all costs versus getting out in the world. And I like what you talked about. Like, I like to talk about it as like iteration cycle, reducing that iteration cycle between like trying new things. So I got one more big question I'd love to get your take on is like, I imagine, having the deck stacked against you, according to society, dropping out of college, being a C student, going and chasing down this big, this big dream or whatever. Like you probably had to grow a lot personally. You had to probably like go reinvest in yourself, your skills and all that. Yeah. What are some of like the biggest super skills that you feel like you had to develop? You did a good job of executing. How'd you go about learning those?
That's great. Yeah. And I want to back up just a second because you mentioned something that I think is super important, which is the conditioning. And I think that's a great word because I mentioned it's one of our 5 core values that we have to decondition people when they come work for us at self-publishing school. It's like, no, like fail. Because they're like coming to me like, hey, is it okay if I do this? Or what do you think here? Or do I have a proof? It's like, just do it. Like, what do you think we should do? Okay, do that and fail. And great, come back and tell me what you learned.
Forgiveness, not permission.
Exactly, yeah. But biggest skills that I've had to learn, there's life stuff and then there's business stuff. I mean, I think the innate skills, and it's not totally the question, but the innate skills that helped and that I had or developed were work ethic and discipline. Those were 2 big ones. And I think that's big credit to my parents. And then biggest skills to develop would be, on the business side of things, it's systems and operations, not flying by the seat of your pants. And that's become a superpower for me. That was originally something that like I totally avoided and hated. Like, you can't bottle this up. Like there's just so much talent. Like, and I don't want to be put in a box and like all this stuff, just being overconfident. But it was that. And this, so how important systems are in your business. Also, so systems, processes, playbooks, whatever you want to call it, that was a big one. Hiring, and that's a huge part of, I think, our competency now. And one thing that we do really well, and I think that's been a huge part of why self-publishing schools been successful, is because I'm really good at hiring great people and they're really talented. And so we grow. But it's like, I believe that it's kind of like, they say in real estate investing is like, whatever it is, 60-80% of your return on investment is decided the day that you close on the house. I think it's, or the property. I think it's pretty similar with talent. It's like, maybe it's 50 to 70 or 80% of how well they're going to do in that role is going to be decided the day that you hire them. So you need to get really good at that. I think leadership was a big one. I was not a good leader. I was a horrible leader. I was a good manager, but a horrible leader. And so I really have invested in learning those skill sets of leadership and people development and all those things. So those are probably the big life skills that I can think of. Or mostly business skills that I can think of.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's a great list. That's a great list of like, hang this on your wall if you're a young, ambitious entrepreneur, things to like be aware of that, and to be working on and be cognizant of as you have success. These are definitely things you're going to have to continue to develop. So thank you so much for your time. I know we're running out of time here. So I'm going to include a link to Self-Publishing School, to your latest book published, some other links here, cool articles or whatever, anywhere else that, you'd love me to point to for people, projects you're working on that we'd love to promote.
Cool. Yeah. One thing that would be especially relevant for this crowd is I've got something called the 7-Figure Principles podcast, or the 7-Figure Principles show. It's that question that you just asked me. It's all of those things that I've learned and that we've learned in scaling Self-Publishing School. So you can subscribe to that podcast or YouTube channel. That'd be helpful. There's a Self-Publishing School podcast if you're thinking about writing and publishing books. And then lastly, if you want to write and publish a book, go to our website. You can book a call with the team. We'd be happy to chat with you, help you. I see how we can help you, all that stuff. And I mean, with this audience, man, like if people are looking for roles and you're looking for, whether it's an internship, a full-time role, whatever, reach out to me, reach out to us. We are hiring all the time. So we've got an awesome team and looking for more A players. And I know that the people in the Praxis community are A players. So yeah,
that's awesome. We're going to have to send some participants knocking on your door. So thank you again so much for your time. Chandler Bolt, everybody. Check out this episode. You like it, let us know in the comments, and we'll be back again soon.